Before we get to the interview, a reminder about the upcoming Tonebenders Event in Mexico City on October 21st. Starting at 4 p.m., there will be a couple of panels featuring some of the top sound people in Mexico, followed by free dinner and drinks for a Tonebenders sound design meetup. Big thanks to the sponsors for this event, the SAE Institute Mexico, and the Motion Picture Sound Editors. We will be announcing the full lineup of the amazing people that will be taking part in the event soon, so stay tuned.
Look, I'm glad you feel all comfy talking to Elmo about your feelings. But I'm not him, okay? I know it's not all sunny days, which is just fine by me. So, if you're feeling grouchy too, I guess you can sit by us. Not that close.
Yeah.
Welcome to Tonebenders Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Sound Ideas' highly anticipated mid-year sale has been extended for a limited time, and there are only a few days left. Unlock 50% off on thousands of premium recordings from epic cinematic sounds to authentic ambiances. They're ideal for any creative project. This applies to all Sound Ideas proprietary libraries. With over 45 years of experience, Sound Ideas delivers audio trusted by professionals worldwide. Head over to soundideas.com to learn more. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I will be your host as we talk about the sound of Sesame Street. I'm very excited for this episode. I grew up on Sesame Street. I watched it every day from when I was 3 until I was maybe 6. I learned so much about just general life from Sesame Street. There were days where it was my main babysitter, in fact. It had a hold on me like I'm not sure any show has since. So I'm super excited to talk about some of the people who do the sound for it. First up, joining me today is Steve Giammaria. Steve has been previously on Tonebenders talking about another of my favorite series, The Bear, way back in episode 198. Steve is also the supervising sound editor on Sesame Street. It's absolutely wonderful to be talking to you again today. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having us.
And joining us also, we have Dick Maitland. Dick has been a sound effects editor and re-recording mixer on Sesame Street for a very long time. IMDb lists him as on it for 953 episodes, but I think he may even go back further than that because IMDb might not have been tracking things that long ago, so I suspect that number is even higher in reality. I'm really excited to meet you today, Dick. Welcome to Tonebenders.
How you doing? Brought my friend.
There we go, on brand right off the top. Why don't we start with you, Dick? Can you tell me how you first got the Sesame Street gig and when that was?
Well, yes, it was back in 1968, believe it or not. I was working at ABC Sound Effects at 66th Street, and the old-timers there, Bob Prescott and Terry Ross and Ed Blaney, there was some kid show down at the studio. You go down and do it. We don't want to do any stupid kid show. So they sent me down to the corner of 67th Street. There was a little Reeves Teletape studio. They wanted to do a cartoon thing. And I went in and I met Joan Gans Cooney. I didn't know who she was. And she said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Dick Maitland." And they sent me down. And they said, "Well, where are the other guys?" I said, "Well, they sent me down." "Well, okay, go on out there." And I went out and I met Jim Henson and Frank Oz were out there. And they were doing a little thing about Wendy, which is a flying puppet that flew into a wall and crashed. And they wanted to do this whole thing. And so they looked at me and said, "What do you got for a crash?" And I'm saying, "Well, nothing. They just sent me down to see if I could help you. I don't know what you want to do." "Well, we want to have a crash when this goes through." Well, back in 1968, we didn't have a button you could push that had a crash on it. So I saw the stage and I said, "Guys, Patty McGlades is next door. I'm buying. You guys got to build me a pile of junk that I can knock it over." And they all started laughing. "Okay, we'll hold you to it." So they built me a pile of junk in the middle of the floor with boxes and pieces of wood and a couple of pieces of metal. And on cue, I threw myself into the thing and made a big crash. And then I took a piece of metal, the last crash, and went tingling. And so that was the sound. And Jim and Frank started cracking up and laughing. And they said, "That is just great. That's just great. We got to do it one more time, though." Oh, come on, guys. So I got the stage, and the stagehands are laughing. They build me another pile. And so once I get up, and stood up. They say, ready to go. They rolled the tape, and they did the whole thing. And then I jumped into the pile of wood and crashed and boom, bang, and it tinkled at the end. And then I looked up, and they were all laughing because the cameras were pointed at me. They made me redo it so they could tape it so they could laugh about it later.
Oh my God, does that exist somewhere?
Oh yeah, someplace they've got the tape it's in the archives of Sesame Street.
Oh my goodness, I had to find that.
But we joke when I see the guys once in a while. I see Frank. Frank came to Sesame Street a while back as a visit, and we joked about that opening day. And he says, "I still got that tape somewhere, Maitland." I said, "Okay." So that's how it started. And then but there was another gentleman that started the show. And he was a wonderful old sound effects guy that worked on previous shows with them. Captain Kangaroo was the show he worked on, but he was failing and wasn't feeling well. So they said, we want to give him this shot. So I said, great. So then 6 months later, they called me and said, he's not doing well. Can you come in and help us out? So I showed up, and they got the job after that. So I started in the middle of season 1, actually, and I finished it up. But we gave him credit for the season because he was the original guy. That's 4,700 shows ago, to give you the answer to the question.
Wow.
So that's a lot of Boeings.
Is that 4,700?
That's a lot of Boeings.
Wow.
Yeah, I couldn't get them all on IMDb. I couldn't do them all.
Of course.
I just couldn't enter them all. So I just gave up. I said, okay, fine. Whatever's in there is enough,
Definitely.
They also did the Electric Company. We were doing it at the same time. And 3-2-1 Contact, they were all doing it at the same time, but they all needed the kind of sound effects Foley type of sound effects that I do. Still do, actually.
You worked a little bit on that first show, then you came in halfway through season 1.
Correct.
What was the schedule like back then for each episode?
Well, you got to understand, there was no live television back then. We had to tape it, and we were taping on 2-inch tape that required taping continuously and then joining the elements together. And so we did 104 shows, if I remember the last time when we started. So that's a full-time schedule. And we did this up at the 81st Street Theater on Broadway in Manhattan. Reeves Teletape was at the time. And so they moved the set up there. They moved a soap opera out to move Sesame Street in. And that's where we did the shows. And I lived 2 blocks away, so I just walk over there. We lived in the studio. We all had our own lunch table. They would bring the lunches in. We were there from 8 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night almost every day to get the schedule done because we had to do rehearse, tape, and keep on going to get all the elements put together. Meanwhile, another part of Sesame Street was creating the films, and they were doing the animation. But I was also given the films to add the sound effects to because a lot of the original films that we used to do, they didn't have sound effects, so they were terrible. So they said, Dick, you got to add effects to these things.
Those were hour-long episodes at that point too, right?
This was a lot of material that we did. And then, when they started cutting back and doing shorter and shorter shows, it made it a lot easier, and the schedule was lighter, and now we don't do very many shows.
I mean, still 35.
Still 35.
Still, in the era of 10 episodes of television, 35 is a full schedule.
It is a full schedule. And so that's how it all started.
Wow. What is your role on the show currently?
I am the sound effects director. What I do is we shoot the material in the studio, and I have a place in the studio where I have all my props and sound effects. And so I provide sound effects live during the taping, during the day to cue the actors. They got to hear things so that they can react to them, and especially for long takes so they can hear it, and then they react. If they don't hear it, they don't react. So you can't have somebody on the floor saying, okay, react. They have to hear it. So the Muppets have to hear it, and they react to the sounds as they go, and they want to hear the stuff. So that's what I do live. And then it comes back later when they edit it, then I get the post-production parts of it when they edit it into full shows, and then I have to recreate the sound effects or add new sound effects as we go along. Now, I don't do that at the studio. My wife's dining room is now a Foley studio for sound effects, and I can do about 70% of the work I do from the dining room. And it's great because I have a whole kitchen to grab stuff, pots and pans from. So it's just wonderful. I have all her stuff to go. And so I'm constantly coming out. She says, where's my fry pan? I said, oh, it's right over there.
Sorry about the dents.
Yeah, that's right. There's a few marks on it that weren't there before.
It's funny, if you pull out the handles and some of the sound effects, you can hear you guys going at it. It's funny.
Yeah, and so I have a cement slab that I created. And so I have that under my counter. And so I can do all the footsteps. I have 4 different pair of shoes that I do the footsteps for. And the reason we do the footsteps was originally Jim wanted the characters to be alive. So to make them alive for 4-year-olds, you have to think about a 4-year-old. What does he think is real? What's real is what he can hear and see and move. And so we would do footsteps. And it started one day when Jim was walking across the set and he wanted his squishy footsteps. So he's going traging through the rain with squishy footsteps, and he wanted squishy footsteps. So I created squishy footsteps for him. So he got halfway across the set, hearing the foot. Then we were feeding it to him on the floor. He could hear it. There's a speaker so he could hear it. And he stopped in his tracks. He said, "Who's doing that?" And I said, "Well, me. Why?" He says, "How are you doing that?" So he sent 2 people over to see how I was doing. He wanted to know how I did it. And what you do with squishy footsteps, you take water and you put soap in it, soap water, like dishwasher and stuff like that. And you put paper towels in it until it's all soaped up. And then you just take the paper towels and squish them. Squish, 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 squish. And that's how we did the squishy footsteps. It was just basic.
You were doing it live for
I
him?
was doing it live to him watching across the set. So he says, "I want footsteps for all the puppets," because they were floating around in the air. And so he said, "That's it. From now on, we want footsteps to ground the puppets so the kids can think they're real." So the whole concept was to get the eyeballs of the kids to believe in the puppets. And to this day, when kids come to the studio and they'll see a puppeteer with a hand up in the puppet, they'll walk right up and start talking to the puppet, not the person. The person's sitting there talking to him, and they're talking to the hand inside the puppet, because it's called a willing suspension of disbelief, and that's what makes Sesame Street work at that level.
Well, it certainly worked for me when I was a kid. As I mentioned in the intro, I was addicted to the show for multiple years in my youth, and obviously maybe one of the most famous episodes is Saying Goodbye to Mr. Hooper. I was 6 years old when that episode came out. I remember it. That was when Big Bird had to kind of confront death for the first time, and nothing in kids' television had ever dealt with anything like that before. Like, that was, kids don't need to know about that. It really blew my 6-year-old brain when I first saw that episode. Do you remember that day, or do you remember anything about it?
I was there that day, and it was it took 2 days, if I remember correctly, to do it right, because there was a lot of emotion. Big Bird, he calls him Mr. Looper. Remember? Not Hooper, Looper. And so they had explained to him, and we had to keep doing it different ways until we got just the right feeling for it. And she said, "He's not coming back." And so that was the key, that once he understood he's not coming back, they didn't get into going to heaven and all that stuff. He's not coming back. He's gone away and he's not coming back. And so that you can miss somebody. And so that's how they sort of eased their way into it. But it was difficult in the studio because he was an amazing human being. I mean, he was an original character that, by the way, when we started using him, he was basically banned back in 1954. He had a price on his head for all the activities he did during, as a communist sympathizer, they called him. They hired him in spite of that. And it never became a problem for us because he was such a great character. And he brought that thing to life. I mean, he was, and he had a way with talking to kids in a certain way. Kids listened to him. And so that was his gift. And so that was a tough show to do.
My father passed away in November, and my daughter, who is 8, so a little bit older, she didn't know how to process it. I didn't think of it at the time, but I should have played her that episode. It teaches everything that was needed. We had a celebration of life, and she had never cried. She never really understood it. And her cousin was giving a little talk at the celebration of life for my father, and that's when it hit her. And she just lost it. This little 8-year-old just started crying so hard. I know that episode for a lot of kids of my generation was really important in understanding that whole concept. It was handled perfectly, and it kind of broke ground because, as I said earlier, no one had ever tackled that for kids before. I recently worked on a show called Alma's Way, which is produced by Sonia Manzano, and I had limited interaction with her. I was a sound supervisor. She was the producer. But every time I met her, she just made everyone in the room super happy. Do you have any memories of working with her?
Oh, sure. She was a key to stabilizing the story in the Fix-It shop and all around. Sonia Manzano played Maria, and in fact, I just saw her recently walking down the street. She was the soul of that whole center of the universe. because she was the mother figure. That became a very strong figure, especially with all the other elements around her. And so I think it was important that she centered the show in the way that she did. She just had a very sensitive way of talking to people.
Sorry, I had to just nerd out on Sesame Street. As I said, it was an important part of my life as I was a kid.
Of course.
Let's get back to the sound part. Steve, you're currently the sound supervisor and re-recording mixer. How long have you been on the show for? It's going to be dwarfed by the 9,000 episodes that Dick's been on.
My story starts 50 years later. Literally, I started on the first thing I did was for the show was the season 50 special. My producer had been chasing Sesame Street for a little while, and then Elmo had a talk show, the Not Too Late Show, so I was able to do the pilot for that, and it went well, and eventually started on the show. And it coincided with me having a child, so it was like all kind of perfect. It's interesting coming into a show that's been going for 50 years. I don't think, are there any other, besides maybe some soap operas, like that just doesn't exist. And then something as important as Sesame Street. And then I got to meet, living legend Dick Maitland here. It's an interesting show to work on. There's definitely some, it's all about, maintaining what's happened in the past, what things, the iconic sounds people are familiar with, while also, keeping it up and keeping it fresh and making it play for the kids is really. It's
important that there's a carry through of all the different elements. Like Grover has a certain pair of leather shoes that he wears. And he clomps around in these leather shoes. That's his signature sound. Almost all the characters have a signature sound, which now, I said, you left out the sound. And he said, why? I said, because it's his signature sound. He's not the character, it's attached to his character.
Yeah.
Even the new people on the show itself, the producers and writers and stuff like that, are not familiar with a lot of the stuff that's been around for half a century. And so that's what I used on there. I said, he's been doing that for half a century. Can we put it back in, please?
That's the thing. You are the keeper of the lore. I watched a lot of Sesame before I started, and as a child, you can't watch 50 years. You just can't. So right. You have an interesting role where you can. Let's go to the Grover's footsteps. I remember. I don't know if you remember this. You called me up and were yelling at me one time because I didn't play them loud enough. And I'm like, okay, I'll turn them up. And, but the producers want them. And you won the argument by pulling the Jim Henson card. And you're like, well, Jim Henson was a friend of mine and he would have agreed with me. I'm like, well, you win.
Yeah. Well, it's also, then there was the invisible Snuffleupagus.
Yeah.
That's another trade. The kids, they had a problem because they wanted the kids to be believed when they said something. And so then finally they had to come to terms with the fact that Snuffleupagus was real and that he could be seen. Mm-hmm. So when the kids see something, they could say something and the parents would believe them. Mm-hmm. And so that was another Maria thing where she came to rescue and said, look, you see something, you tell me, and I will listen to you. And so they wanted to be able the kids to be able to relate to the adults in the room.
I remember that episode as a kid. That was the one for me. That was that's the one that stuck with me when Snuffleupagus was real.
That's right.
Yeah.
See, it sticks with you.
It does. Yeah.
It's like glue. It's just sort of a cosmic glue that sticks after a long time.
I have a question for you, Dick, if I may, Tim.
Yes, definitely.
The thing that strikes me with you is how much you still care about the show and the job you've been doing for so long. I can only imagine how hard I would be phoning it in after 50 years. How do you stay as passionate as you are about it?
There's an art to it. There's an art to doing Foley, by the way.
For sure.
Foley sound can only be done if you see and do. Mm. You can't think about what you're doing. Mm. If you think about doing Foley, you'll always be late because you're processing. So you have to think-do, which is the same with footsteps. Mm. What you do is you think about things as a 4-year-old. Mm. And once you get into that mindset and thinking about think-do, you don't put the brain in. So I can just enjoy and think about it and love it the same as I did because I think about it like I'm a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And so I never get tired of it. Yeah. Because I'm playing. I got my rubber ducky here. I can make the rubber ducky go. But it becomes a sound thing that you just... It's a knack, and you love it, and I just love it. I'm just a freak of nature. What can I do?
Yeah. No, it's just we'll be on these calls, and you'll be fighting with the producers for some sound, and which is great.
Oh,
it's inspiring to see that you still have that level of commitment and passion after this many years. I mean, I don't know that I could keep it up for that long.
Well, when you spend a lot of time doing it and it never ends. In 1984, they gave me a choice of staying in the workshop or being, I said, what do you want to do? And the guy says, here's what you do, Dick. Be a freelancer, because if you're 65 and you get you let go or they retire, he says, this way, if you're an independent, you can stay as long as you want. And I wanted to stay as long as I could, work as long as I could, and it's worked out for me because now I'm octogenarian and I'm still making the funny noises. So it worked out for me.
And still learning too. You're still like, whenever he comes in, he's like, oh, what's that plugin? I got to get that one. The way you stay up with the technology is also outstanding. I get exhausted just thinking about how many different systems you would have had to learn over the years.
My home system is basically what I call hodgepodge lodge. And I use a variety of different instruments. I have a VCS-1 Putney synthesizer that was created in 1970 and brought over here by Pink Floyd. They left them here and I bought them. And so I started using those synthesizers. It's got a joystick for doing the swishing sound. That's how I do the
Is that how you do it? I say your swishes are better than anybody else's.
Because it's a joystick.
All right.
So to me, sound effects are musical instruments. And so I have a lot of instruments that I can bring up on the computer now using 4 or 5 different programs. And so it all merged. So I have 5 or 6 different ways to get to any one particular thing, which allows me to think freely and just come up with stuff. And they challenge me at Sesame Street all the time with coming up with stuff, trust me.
What's your most favorite signature Sesame Street sound?
Oh, well, basically my rubber ducky. This is the guy that's been around the longest. This is Jim Henson's original rubber duck.
Oh.
He owned this thing, and I have it. I wrote it on the bottom of it. And so this is it's turned right. We had to go to New Jersey to find a duck that did this because all the ducks look straight ahead this way. He wanted it to look at the camera. So Nat Monjoy, who was the guy, knew a guy in New Jersey, and he had to make this right turn rubber ducky. And he made a whole bunch of these things custom made for us.
That's amazing.
And this is the last one of the right turning rubber duck.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that's my favorite sound effect of all time is Mr. Rubber Ducky. Although there's been some humdingers. The bowling ball in the garbage can chasing the chickens was pretty good. We've had some fun stuff in the studio.
So when you first started working on the show back in season 1, you were doing sound live on set, correct?
Correct.
Well, if you were inside in a studio, how come those shows have the ambiances of an exterior street outside?
To do the traffic noise, I originally had 78 RPM record players. I had 3 of them, tri-deck. And so, but to do the traffic all day long, I couldn't figure out how to do that. And this is before cart machines. So I took an Ampex 601 tape recorder, turned it upside down, put it up on a high deck, and then made a long tape loop that would play, and it would just go down, and it was like a traffic loop that went, it was like about a minute. And so that I turned that on. So I got the tape machine doing this little loop to traffic to keep noise going. And we had to keep noise going because there was so much noise in the studio. They had to bury a lot of it. And they wanted the sound of a police whistle and all this stuff. And so I had to put all this stuff in the original soundtracks. And then we finally got cart machines, and so I could make a 5-minute loop, which I could then hit the button and play at all times. But it became very, very interesting when you try to get to do multiple backgrounds. So now that's where my triple turntable come in, because now I could do the wind, and you could slow the variable speed, the sounds to get the wind low and fast, and the rain, and do all this stuff. And I originally had a rain tray, which is a giant plastic box with marbles, rain marbles, little round rain type marbles, and you can just roll this around to do the sound of rain. So that's the way it was done. I've seen some of the original stuff that I did, and I'm saying, how did I do that?
Were you off stage in your own little room, and what you were doing was being piped in for the actors?
Basically, I was on the balcony of the 81st Street Theater, and I set up a table, and I had all my stuff around me in boxes, and then I had 2 metal cabinets where I put all the props and stuff I would need. And then I would bring in what I couldn't find or figure out how to do. Originally, I was on the floor of the studio, but that became an issue because of the stage hands, the timing, and the rules and regulations. So they put me in the balcony. And the stagehand said, okay, that's fine. He's up there. Great. The technician said, he's fine. Leave him alone up there. Because I had to come in and create stuff off schedule, and they wouldn't let me do it on the floor because then they had to pay the whole crew. So that's why they stuck me in the balcony. So I became this little wart on the side of the studio that made all the funny noises. And then they put me in a back room. So I had a room that had everything in it. And there's pictures of me in this one room in the back of the studio at 81st Street. And in the hallway were all the cabinets, so I had all the props that I needed. And I'd lug stuff in and out to make stuff work.
So at what point then did they end up doing a more edited, like closer to what we do now?
Well, we got to 1-inch tape. Editing became easier. And then we could do the stuff in the studio. And they actually were doing editing in the studio at 81st Street in a room down the hallway with a guy named Bob Emmerich. And he would edit the show together. And I was constantly walking up down the hall bringing sound effects to him. So what I would do is I had a cart machine in his room that I gave him, and I'd bring stuff down and I'd say roll the record, and I'd punch the tape, and he'd get the recorder. Then he would edit it in the room down the hallway. And that's how they assembled the show. Those were before they had big edit rooms like they do today.
Sure.
So it was an ongoing process, an evolving process all the way along. And then we moved out to Queens, and became much more sophisticated. And they built me a room, a soundproof room. I actually had 3 rooms because there's so much stuff out there. If you go out there today, it fills 3 rooms worth of stuff that you can go through and rattle and shake and do whatever you want. And then I took the best of what I needed at home. So now I go back and forth. When I have to go out there, I go out and spend, 2 or 3 hours. I get little Pro Tools. I record it, then I bring it home, and then put it back in. And then we upload to you.
Yeah.
You mentioned 1-inch tape, so that would have been, I think, the late 70s that 1-inch tape was coming around.
Yeah.
Before that, how are you being mic'd? Like, if you're in the same room, I'm just completely confused by how this actually came together.
Okay, there was an audio booth, and they ran microphones up to my room.
So you were on the balcony, but in a booth?
No, it was sort of open to the studio, but the studio was quiet.
Okay.
So basically the studio is like a big recording studio. Then I got really smart one day, and I ran out of traffic. So I'm sitting looking, and behind me is a door that opens to the street. Oh, how cool is that? So I stuck a shotgun microphone out the street, out the balcony, and aimed it up toward Broadway. And so I had the perfect street noise. I just opened up the mic, and I had street noise. I didn't have to do the tape machine. Until the 2 guys walked down the street, used some language that you don't normally hear on television.
Especially not Sesame Street.
And it was in the middle of a taping.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I got caught. So I said, okay, no more microphone out the door. Back with the tape. Oh, yeah. I remember that day. But so I did everything on the balcony, and we'd go to the audio booth and then mix it into the actual program. And then I would send sound effects to post where they had to edit something and they wanted to tighten it up, and they'd say, they'd send me a 3/4-inch tape, and I'd play the 3/4-inch tape, and then I'd make my sound effects to that.
You mentioned that you had 3 rooms. Did you mean 1 for recording and 2 for prop storage?
I did. Out in Kaufman, I had one studio that I called my live room, that I would be literally live to the studio. Then I had another room that I could do the post work in. And so I had a 16-track tape machine with a videotape machine that synced to the tape machine, a little remote control thing, basic post at the time. And so I'd go back and forth to 2 rooms, doing the editing for the post in one room and then the live in the other. And then I had a third room that had all the stuff, and then all the way down the hallway, it's still there. All the cabinets, all the stuff is in there, along with over 778 RPM records going back to 1930. And then a cabinet of 800 LPs going back to the same time where all the sound effects came from. And all of that has now been honed down to digital. But the libraries are still there if you want to buy them. I'll send them to you.
Is that stuff all digitized now?
Oh, it's all digitized.
Okay.
Oh, sure.
I was going to say, somebody better jump on that, because that's a gold mine.
The good news is I can vary speed the stuff the way I used to. You got to keep the vary speed, because that is the key to having an infinite amount of, I've got this 2.1 million sound effects I have on file in my little room, but because I can bring that into my machine and then very speed it. So it's basically I have an infinite sound effects supply. That's the key to it, is being able to just constantly vary speed the thing. When you think of a sound effect, I'm thinking of it in 3 different speeds, which is the same thing as, eye, hand. Mm-hmm. You don't put the brain in there. You just feel it. You can see it in your head. Mm-hmm. Huh. And that's hard to teach somebody. I've tried to teach 3 or 4 people, and some people just could not do it. They could not use their brains, and so they couldn't do it. It's actually a trick.
I mean, I've we're missing a sound effect. I'll just cut it in, and it's just to somehow match what you're doing is it's tough. It's tough. I'm like, I'll just throw a whoosh in. I'm like, it's just not right. It's not one of Dick's whooshes. I don't know. I don't understand.
Well, because I use a joystick.
Well, sure, yeah. You got the Pink Floyd joystick. Yeah. No, it's yeah, I don't know. There's something magical in the way you work, for sure.
Well, then there's the old bell buzzer box, which I was going to bring. I had a box that I built that had all the different bells and buzzers I could possibly use on it. And I could plug it into the wall, and they all ran off a battery, and I had a rheostat so I could turn the volume up, to turn the speed of the bells up and to slow it down. So I had an infinite amount of bells and buzzers for all the different, because Sesame Street had a lot of bells and buzzers and doors and hoopers, bells and all that stuff. And so, I had to be able to be flexible. And so I couldn't have 87 different props, so I just made one box that had them all there.
Steve mentioned earlier that he was amazed that your kind of enthusiasm and drive on the show still. You're a bit of a unicorn because nowadays we have Foley artists and we have sound effects editors. It's rare that someone's doing kind of both. Which one do you prefer? Do you like being on set, making the sounds as they go, or do you like grabbing Pink Floyd's joystick and making crazy sounds in your kitchen?
Well, the point is, because I'm self-trained, to me it's all one thing. It's evolved in our business, as you well know, to do mixing, as my friend does here, and then have another guy that does music editing and then sound effects. There's usually 3 people involved. And in Sesame, there's a music guy that makes the music, then there's a guy that edits the music, and he puts the music in and makes sure it's synced up and the beats are all right and all that stuff. So that's his job. And then I match what he's doing sometimes. I work with him because I'll do stuff. There are edits in the show where it's a musical thing, but then there's a visual graphic that covers over that, and they want to hear the sound of that graphic, which is not a musical effect. And so we work together, the music and sound effects, to come up with a composite that is that effect. So visually, it works for the 4-year-old. See, I look at it from the eyes of the 4-year-old. So I'm much more critical about it than he is, actually.
It's true. It's true.
I think someone that people would describe as extraordinary is Jim Henson.
Yes.
How important was the sound for him? Was it something on the forefront of his mind, or?
All important. It was all important. Jim was all about sound. He loved sound in general. He would do whole music things. And when I first met him, he's working on a movie called Immorata's Jug Band Christmas. And he wanted all the sound of the boat floating down the river because everything was visceral to him, so he wanted to hear it. He knew that I could do that. That's why he called me in. One of the sounds that we wanted to work on was he had to break a drum. And he agonized over the sound of that drum. He would agonize over sound effects in the drums. And some of his darker shows that he did, Dark Crystal, he agonized over the sounds being maybe too scary. So he was all about the sound. And you can remember Jim doing some of his videos. And it was all about the tap dancing and the sound. That drove what we did in the original days of Sesame Street. It was all about the sound when we started up. And so there was a sound for everything. Poor old Big Bird would walk through the set and he would always crash going off camera. And they said, we got to stop having him crash because it's going to hurt the birdie. We got tired of hearing him say, "I'm okay." The old joke, "I'm okay," which is Oscar's line too, came from the old Christmas movie.
It's a Wonderful Life.
They actually stole that line where the old guy gets drunk at the Christmas party and he walks down the street and falls into the garbage cans and he yells back, "I'm okay." And so that became the getaway for Sesame Street. Anytime somebody would crash and bump into something, "I'm okay." That's how we did it.
What were Big Bird's feet?
I have a set of Big Bird feet that they created for me, that they made.
Amazing.
So I could actually put them on, I can wear them, and I can thud them on the ground. Because at some point you want to hear him walking into the set, hear him thumping around doing stuff, especially if you see him full body. And so when he's full body and you see him walking, I will do footsteps for him. and they gave me a set of footsteps that thump on the ground that sound just like his footsteps.
I love that.
Steve, since you started working on the show, do you feel like you've put yourself into this 50-year history?
It's tough because you don't want to start just changing all sorts of stuff. I mean, the big thing we had going from season 50 to season 51 is we had to start doing it in 5/1 for the HBO delivery and just for archival purposes and such. So there was a little bit of a change in how we did things. I know, Dick records, because the show was in stereo, he had some stereo footsteps and some other things that just like don't quite work in 5/1. So it was a little bit of back and forth of like, okay, what's the new kind of default sound of the show? Not too different. I mean, my big thing is dialogue, and I just wanted to make sure, we have a proper dialogue edit now instead of just taking, the line cut of the mix. So we're getting the puppet mics, headset mics clean. My dialogue editor, Craig LeJudas, shout out Craig, he goes through and really combines everything. And, there is a good boom mic that picks up the humans, doesn't work great on the puppets, so we need to cut around all of that. We're using auto align now, so we can combine things. So I feel like it's a lot more, some of the older shows, and not, to disparage anybody, but it's, it's on a set and it's supposed to be outside. You get a little bit of that room sound. It's just not quite, what you would hear if you were outside.
That's right.
So, I try and keep it as dry as I can. We're trying to sell the reality of it to kids. And balancing those footsteps, that Dick gives me. I didn't realize there were footsteps. And then, of course, there are footsteps. It makes perfect sense. So just trying to get any sort of props we can add to really ground the puppets in reality when they're grabbing things and that sort of stuff. So, Dick gives me all that stuff. So just making sure those play as real as possible, because then there's also the cartoony effects. There's, I kind of divide the stuff into two different, there's the real things that ground everything. And then there's the whooshes and the slide whistles and the bonks and all the fun stuff. So trying to keep those two things balanced to really ground it in reality, but also make it fun.
We actually went to the studio and we recorded the sound of the studio.
Yep.
He's got the files. He can actually recreate the actual sound of the studio, different areas of the studio. So that if you had dry dialogue, you could actually add the actual room sound that he's got, can throw it right in. So that's a trick that he's got at his fingertips too. Some of the things that we do, there's a guy named Joe Fiedler who's the musician that he writes all the stuff and then gives it to our music editor. And Joe has to go look at the stuff and make it match what we're doing as well. So there's all these different elements that are all looking at the content and try to shape that into something. But all I do is, after I see all this stuff, is look at it through the eyes of a 4-year-old and say, well, that's not going to work. I got to hear this, you got to hear that, because otherwise kids don't think it's visceral. And so I make him crazy. I really do.
I am a little bit of a traffic cop sometimes between, because we're turning these around fast too. So everybody covers everything, and then we have to duke it out in the mix review, but it's fine. That's, that's par for the course for
and
sure.
Of course, in the mixed review, we sit and there are people that they come from disparate areas inside of Sesame Street. And so they want to hear this, they want to see that. Well, why did we do this? There's a give and take. Mm-hmm. And you try to be polite as possible. And I try not to use the word idiot and moron. And try to stay away from all that stuff, I
mean, that's one thing that struck me when I started working is the care that goes into crafting that there's a whole curriculum team. And that's not an accident, any of this stuff.
No.
There's teams of people making sure that this is educational content, valuable content for kids, and also fun. I think we're a little bit in charge of fun.
Oh, yeah.
But all of the people here, regardless of how long they've been around and how old they are in comparison to the show, I think there is a sense of responsibility to just, taking this show and continuing its legacy and its importance.
Back in the day when I was watching Sesame Street, there was two components. There was the stuff on the street, Oscar in his can, humans interacting with them, and then there were film segments. Like my favorite one, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which I think was actually the Pointer Sisters, if I recall correctly. Were you doing like the pinball sound effects in that one, or was the film department a whole separate thing?
The first 20, 30 years of the show, they'd get these films in, and I would get a lot of them sent to me to sweeten up. They were great at the filmmaking and they got the dialogue right, but I had to go and put all the sound effects in and sweeten them up, basically. They needed to be sweetened up and sesame-sized.
Sesame-sized, that's a great word.
So I sesame-sized all these little disparate elements to edit the sesame-sized ones into the show.
You're listed as an actor on a few episodes as well.
You're the voice of Slimy.
Well, yeah, there's another thing that I do. Oscar's pet worm is Slimy the Worm. We decided to give him a voice, so I was in there. I had a harmonizer, and I called the guy in Italy to find out how I can make the harmonizer smooth, because when you harmonize a voice, there's all kinds of trace elements that make it sort of raspy and not nice. He told me how to modify the box itself. So I modified the box, and then I could plug it in, and I could talk through the harmonizer box and be Slimy the Worm. I would get on the mic, and they'd put my voice on the floor, so I'd be part of the actual character. The guy that actually did Snuffleupagus was the worm.
So this is the puppeteer moving the mouth.
He could make the mouth move a little bit. What would happen is we would rehearse it, and I would ad-lib stuff to make it funnier, and then he would laugh, and then he would make the mouth match what I was ad-libbing. Almost all the Slimy stuff, there'd be a close-up, because we did 2 or 3 different versions to get it funnier and sillier. And then there was a couple that we did where Slimy became sort of the alter ego of Oscar. Telling, knock it off! Get out of my garbage can. Go away. The studio would crack up to see this worm barking at people in the studio. We do a lot of the Slimy voice, and then he gets paid for it, and I do the voice.
I really love the idea of thinking of Steve staying up late, finishing the mix on The Bear, and then coming in the next morning and starting to work on Sesame Street. Two shows are pretty different.
It's a nice palate cleanser.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
sure.
The one thing I think the luxury we have in sound is being able, I'll work on a documentary. I'll work on something like The Bear. I'll work on Sesame Street. Like, you can be a little more flexible, where I feel like we're not pigeonholed as much as like picture editors or some other folks. Because, I came up not doing, children's programming. And for some reason, it's looked down upon a little bit. I think in the industry, like, oh, that's just a kid's show. And I we had a discussion internally about like, hey, is it a risk starting on Sesame Street? When they offered us the gig, I'm like, should we turn this down? Because, then it's, oh, you're just doing kids stuff. Like, am I going to be able to get narrative work if I do this? So that was, and I figured, 2 things. One, it's Sesame Street. You kind of have to. It's the most important television show to maybe ever exist. Like, and
it may
Sesame
be the
Street.
exception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. But if it wasn't Sesame Street, I think that conversation may have gone differently. Not because I look down on it, because it's work is work, and it's great, and people see it. Just that perception for some reason that like, oh, you work on kids shows, like you can't do other stuff. I mean, it's the workflow is a little different, but it's odd that perception is out there. And I'm glad, I don't think it's hurt me.
The perception is very real.
Very real.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I'll talk to people who kind of look down on me doing kid shows, and they're working on, these abstract documentaries that play at festivals. And at the end of the day, those documentaries are seen by numbers measured in the thousands. And the shows I'm working on are measured in the tens and hundreds of millions. They're just kids' eyeballs.
Oh, here's the statistics I have for that. On The Bear, the premiere week, it was like 1.2 billion minutes streamed. And we were like, oh, that's great. Any given week, Bluey is 1.4 billion minutes of streaming. Any random week. The other stat is the movie Encanto has been streamed more minutes than every Star Wars property combined on Disney+. Just Encanto. Before I did kids programming, I was the same. I'm just like, oh, it's just a kids show. And it's like, this is the stuff that's getting watched.
The interesting thing is also that some people look down on the kids programming, but to the kids, as I mentioned earlier, Sesame Street was one of the most important things in my life.
Oh, of course.
A lot of these other shows that run big numbers, people watch it and then they just keep going on. It doesn't leave an impression the way Sesame Street does, for sure. Thank you very much for talking to me today. This was really fun. I've been looking forward to this talk for a while. We've actually been trying to make this happen for like a year or so, so I'm so happy that we finally got it done. It was really fun to talk to you. It was lovely to meet you, Dick, and great to talk to you again, Steve. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Take care.
That was a lot of fun. Dick Maitland is an absolute legend. I really enjoyed talking to him. Big thanks to Steve for connecting us and setting up this interview. Mark your calendars for the Tonebenders event in Mexico City coming up on October 21st. I am really looking forward to it. Stay tuned to the podcast for some excellent shows coming out in a few weeks. I'll talk to you soon. Sound Idea's highly anticipated mid-year sale has been extended for a limited time. Unlock 50% off on thousands of premium recordings from epic cinematic sounds to authentic ambiances. They're ideal for any creative project. This applies to all Sound Idea's proprietary libraries. With over 45 years of experience, Sound Ideas delivers audio trusted by professionals worldwide. Head over to soundideas.com to learn more. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.